Emerging Threats Hub. Hybrid Wars, Smart Weapons, and the Death of Doubt, 4 Futures of Conflict.
Good morning. I'm Sébastien, and this is Emerging Threats Hub. Here's a paradox to start your day. A semi-autonomous region in northeastern Somalia, Puntland, has achieved what billions of dollars in Western counterterrorism spending could not. They've pushed back an ISIS affiliate not with a centralized state apparatus, but with a hybrid model that blends clan elders, Western-trained special forces, and something far more elusive: local legitimacy. This week, we're examining 4 signals from the edge of conflict. 4 stories that, taken together, sketch a map of tomorrow's wars and perhaps pathways to peace. First, Puntland's experiment in hybrid governance and what it reveals about the future of counterterrorism. Second, the United Arab Emirates' new family of loitering munitions, so-called suicide drones, that are rewriting the cost of warfare. Third, the quiet revolution in military classrooms, where artificial intelligence is being integrated into professional education and where skeptics are being told, quote, resistance is futile. And finally, a diplomatic counterpoint, Venezuela, where after years of maximum pressure, some argue that only a grand bargain can break the deadlock. We'll connect these dots, identify the tensions, and crucially, explore viable pathways toward stability, because understanding threats is only half our mission. Architecting peace is the other. Let's begin in the Horn of Africa.
The Puntland Paradox.
Puntland. It's a name you might not know, but you should. This semi-autonomous region in northeastern Somalia declared self-governance in 1998. Unlike Somaliland, it doesn't seek full independence. It functions as a federal member state with de facto autonomy. Its foundation is the Hardy Confederation, a coalition of related clans that provides social cohesion Mogadishu simply lacks. Recent analysis from Small Wars Journal highlights something remarkable. Puntland's hybrid governance model, combining traditional clan kinship with external capacity building, has systematically dismantled an ISIS expansion. They've succeeded where the Somali federal government, and indeed U.S. Africa Command, have struggled. So what does this hybrid model actually look like? Clan elders provide legitimacy and intelligence networks rooted in local trust. External partners, think Western special forces trainers, provide tactical expertise and equipment. The result is a force that knows the terrain both geographically and socially. But here's where we must pause and ask the difficult questions. The article praises this success, yet recent reports from January 2025 show clashes between Puntland forces and local militias. This complicates the stability narrative. Is Puntland's victory against ISIS masking internal fragility? And what are the human rights implications when clan-based militias operate with state-like authority? The central tension is this. Puntland demonstrates that legitimacy, earned through kinship and local governance, can be more effective than top-down state building. Yet that same legitimacy can be exclusionary, potentially marginalizing minority clans or those outside the Hardy Confederation. It risks creating warlords if external funding dries up. So what's the pathway forward? International donors should condition 30% of Puntland funding on transparent, clan power-sharing audits. This isn't about imposing Western democracy. It's about ensuring the hybrid model doesn't calcify into oligarchy. We need mechanisms that allow the model's flexibility while protecting against its inherent risks. The lesson for peacekeeping is profound. Local legitimacy matters more than national sovereignty when confronting non-state actors. But legitimacy without accountability is just another form of power. And power, as always, demands vigilance. Now, let's shift from ancient governance to cutting-edge weaponry.
The Proliferation Puzzle.
At the Dubai Airshow, the UAE's Edge Group unveiled something that should concern anyone watching the Middle East: the Fast Responder family of stealth loitering munitions. These are suicide drones that hover above a battlefield before striking. They cost between $10,000 and $100,000, compared to over $1 million for a conventional cruise missile. Let me be clear about what this means. The UAE joins Turkey, Israel, and China as major exporters of loitering munitions. This isn't just another arms program. It's a fundamental shift in the cost-benefit calculation of warfare. Saturation attacks that would have been prohibitively expensive 5 years ago are now within reach for mid-sized powers and potentially non-state actors. Dr. Jean-Marc Rickley, a GCC defense analyst, frames this as the democratization of destruction. When advanced strike weapons become exportable commodities, traditional air defenses become obsolete. A Patriot missile battery might cost $100 million. It can be overwhelmed by a swarm of 50 loitering munitions, costing less than $5 million total. The ethical dilemma is stark. Should we celebrate indigenous defense industrialization if it means these weapons could be sold to actors with questionable human rights records? Are export controls keeping pace with this technology? The answer, currently, is no. Here's a concrete pathway. The United States should propose a loitering munition test ban treaty, modeled on the 1990s landmine treaties. This wouldn't eliminate the technology. It's too late for that. But it could establish norms around export, deployment near civilian areas, and transparency measures. Think of it as arms control for the drone age. But we must be honest, such treaties require political will that's currently absent. And the UAE's program signals a deeper trend. Middle Eastern powers are tired of being technology importers. They want to be producers. That shift is irreversible. Our task is to shape it towards stability, not escalation. Which brings us to a different kind of irreversible shift inside the minds of those who command these weapons.
The Borg in the classroom.
A recent article in Small Wars Journal makes a startling claim. Artificial intelligence's integration into professional military education (MEE) is inevitable. The author compares institutional resistance to the Borg from Star Trek. Resistance is futile. Let that sink in. The argument is that AI will assimilate military education, and those who question this are choosing obsolescence. This isn't about using AI to grade papers. This is about AI systems recommending tactical decisions, strategic courses of action, even ethical judgments in targeting. The U.S. National Defense Authorization Act for 2023 already mandated PME reform, but AI integration remains deeply contentious. Dr. Ben Zweibelson, a PME reform advocate, argues this is about efficiency. AI can simulate thousands of battlefield scenarios instantly. It can identify patterns human strategists might miss. But Dr. Heather Venable, from Air Command and Staff College, asks the crucial question: what happens to critical thinking when an algorithm becomes the default decision maker? The risk isn't just intellectual laziness, it's algorithmic bias. If an AI is trained on data from past conflicts, it will replicate past assumptions, including flawed ones about civilian casualties, cultural contexts, or escalation thresholds. And in a military culture where questioning authority is already difficult, what happens when that authority is an AI whose logic is opaque? The article's framing resistance is futile mirrors authoritarian tech discourse. It treats skepticism as a bug, not a feature. But in warfare, skepticism is a democratic virtue. It's what prevents illegal orders. It's what protects human rights. So what's the solution? We need mandatory AI ethics training for all PME institutions, co-taught by technologists and military ethicists like Dr. C. Anthony Pfaff. Every AI recommendation must be accompanied by an explainability requirement, a human-readable rationale, and critically, we must preserve the right of human commanders to refuse AI recommendations without career penalty. The question isn't whether AI belongs in military education. It's how we preserve moral and ethical judgment as AI becomes ubiquitous. Because the moment we outsource our conscience to an algorithm, we've already lost the war that matters. Now, let's turn from technology to diplomacy, where human judgment remains, for now, irreplaceable.
The Venezuela calculation.
Since 2019, the United States has pursued a maximum pressure campaign against the Maduro regime in Venezuela. Sanctions, recognition of Juan Guaido as interim president, diplomatic isolation. The result? Humanitarian crisis without political change. Maduro remains in power, more entrenched than before. Now, Foreign Affairs argues that a grand bargain diplomatic engagement, not military force offers, the only viable path forward. This is a profound shift in thinking. It acknowledges that coercion failed, that 25 million Venezuelans have paid the price for a strategy that yielded no results. But it also raises difficult questions. Is Maduro's recent openness to dialogue genuine or a survival tactic to relieve economic pressure? How do we ensure that lifting sanctions doesn't simply allow the regime to consolidate power further? Dr. Michael Penfold, a Venezuela expert, points out that any bargain must prioritize citizens over geopolitics. That means sequencing. Humanitarian access and release of political prisoners first, then incremental sanctions relief tied to verifiable reforms. The stakes are enormous. A successful diplomatic model in Venezuela could create a template for other frozen conflicts, Cuba, Nicaragua, even North Korea. But failure could discredit engagement for another generation, making the next conflict more likely to be military. Here's a principled pathway. The US and EU should propose a phased roadmap with independent monitoring by the UN and Red Cross. Each phase of sanctions relief must be conditioned on specific observable improvements in human rights and democratic space. This isn't about trusting Maduro, it's about verifiable reciprocity. But we must also be honest. Diplomacy requires compromise, and compromise means accepting that regime figures may escape full accountability. This is the moral calculus of peace. The question is whether we can build a process that serves the Venezuelan people while acknowledging geopolitical realities. These four stories, Puntland, UAE's weapons, AI and education, Venezuela diplomacy, appear disconnected. They're not. They represent a central tension in 21st century security.
Central tensions.
Let's connect these dots. Puntland succeeds through hybrid governance, external support combined with deep local legitimacy. Venezuela requires diplomatic compromise, external pressure giving way to negotiated legitimacy. The UAE builds indigenous capacity, technological self-sufficiency that reduces external dependency. AI threatens human agency, technological dependence that could override human legitimacy. Do you see the pattern? Each story is about the relationship between external power and local authority, between technology and humanity, between coercion and consent. The central tension is this. Puntland's model scales poorly. You can't export clan kinship. But its principle, that legitimacy beats firepower, is universal. Meanwhile, UAE's weapons proliferate easily. You can export loitering munitions to any buyer, but its principle, that technology equals power, is destabilizing. And AI? It promises to make military decision-making more efficient, but at the cost of the human judgment that prevents atrocities. It could make the mistake of Venezuela's sanctions impersonal, unyielding, counterproductive, but at algorithmic speed. These models conflict because they answer the question of security differently. Puntland says security comes from community. UAE says it comes from capability. AI says it comes from optimization. Venezuela's experience says it comes from political settlement. They're all partially right. And that's the danger. Partial truths in warfare lead to whole disasters. So how do we synthesize these into viable pathways? First, for hybrid governance models like Puntland, international peacekeeping missions should incorporate traditional authority structures, but only under UN human rights monitoring. We need a new doctrine, call it legitimacy-sensitive peacekeeping, that rewards accountability, not just effectiveness. Second, for proliferating weapons like loitering munitions, we need regional confidence-building measures. The UAE, Turkey, and Israel should establish a Middle East drone control regime, modeled on nuclear safeguards. Not perfect, but it creates a framework for crisis communication and export transparency. Third, for AI and military education, every PME institution should adopt a human override charter, legally protecting commanders who refuse AI recommendations on ethical grounds. We must treat skepticism not as resistance, but as responsibility. Fourth, for frozen conflicts like Venezuela, create a permanent contact group like the one that ended the Balkan Wars, chaired by a neutral party such as Switzerland or Costa Rica. Keep diplomacy insulated from domestic political cycles. These are testable hypotheses. They can be measured, refined, or abandoned if they fail. That's the difference between ideology and principle, between punditry and analysis. Looking ahead, 3 questions will define 2026. Will subnational actors like Puntland demand UN seats, challenging the Westphalian system itself? Will loitering munitions become the IEDs of great power, competition cheap, ubiquitous, and warping every battlefield? And how soon until an AI recommends a military action that humans refuse, creating a crisis of command? Dr. Michael Horowitz, who studies AI and war, warns that the last question isn't hypothetical. It's a scenario wargamed by the Pentagon this year. The AI recommended a preemptive strike based on pattern recognition. Human commanders refused. The AI's creators couldn't fully explain its logic. That uncertainty is the real threat. Dr. Andreas Krieg, a GCC security expert, adds that the UAE's defense industrialization is part of a broader trend. Gulf states hedging against US retrenchment. They're not just buying weapons, they're building ecosystems. That makes arms control harder, but also more urgent. The future of conflict won't be decided by any single technology or doctrine. It will be decided by how we balance the local and the global, the human and the algorithmic, the imperative of security and the requirements of justice. To recap, Puntland teaches us legitimacy matters. UAE's weapons teach us technology proliferates. AI teaches us judgment is fragile. Venezuela teaches us coercion has limits. The thread connecting them is the question of agency. Who decides? On what authority? With what accountability? We'll continue watching these signals, connecting these dots, and exploring pathways to peace, because vigilance without hope is just anxiety, and analysis without solutions is just noise. I'm Sébastien. This is Emerging Threats Hub. You can find us on social media at emergingthreatshub.com. Our hashtag is Emerging Threats Hub. If today's analysis resonated, share it with someone who needs clarity, not catastrophism. And join us next time as we continue to map the edges of conflict and the architecture of peace. Stay vigilant, stay principled, and never doubt that human judgment, flawed as it is, remains our best defense against the threats we create.